Yeah.
This is P.J. Stevens. I am chairman of the Williamson County Historical Commission, and I'm here today to interview Ed Lansford. And this is a part of our ongoing oral history project. Today's date is August 15th, 2014, and we are going to discuss with Mr. Lansford his time growing up in the area, as well as during the Depression and during World War II. And for the record, we are discussing with, his full name is Edwin Myers Lansford, EDWINMYERS LANSFORD Jr. And I am going to turn it over to you, Ed.
Yeah. Well, my life in the USA went through two major nationwide experiences during my childhood and early adult years. The Great Depression during my childhood and World War II in my adult years later. Americans were just getting over the burdens of the Great Depression when darkening clouds of war in Europe began to appear, and I will recount a little of my Depression years' childhood development, and then make a short account of my school days to halfway through college, when I was swept up by the currents of World War II. I was born in 1923 on June 26th. I spent my first 6 years with my mother and father in a small house in Woodland Heights in Houston, a middle-class neighborhood with stately old live oak trees lining the sides of the streets. This was a peaceful, benign setting where I learned all my relationships with people from caring, kindly, benevolent adults, parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, and a few neighbors, but not from other children, since I was an only child. I had no contemporaries to learn with. The only close neighbor children were believed to have tuberculosis, so I was strictly prevented from ever playing with them.
Wow.
However, when I reached age 6, I was entered into a kindergarten class in a nearby elementary school, and finally benefited from social contacts with other kids, as well as learning to read and write in block letters. My father gave me a toy easel blackboard with a scroll device on the top that would display the letters of the alphabet and all the numbers and labeled pictures, and he urged me frequently to practice writing on that toy blackboard. The kindergarten teacher was an accomplished pianist and played marches as the pupils paraded around frequently, and this evoked in me an interest in keyboard music that has lasted ever since. Around this time, the economic crash of 1929 occurred, but my family was fortunately not much affected by it. My father's job was with the Texas Company, a large oil company, and it was never threatened by the Depression as it happened. He had been reared on a Hill County farm, never went to college, but he went to business school and learned accounting there, and he rose to become the second man under the boss of the Texaco accounting department in Houston, which filled one floor of their 10-story building. With my father safe in his job situation, in a middle-class job, my only awareness of the impression during my infant years was the repeated occurrence of knocking on our home doors by scraggly-looking, downcast men begging to be hired to mow the lawn for 25 cents an hour so they could eat that day. While the U.S. moved slowly out of the Depression, my family moved into a newer neighborhood in Houston. Adjacent to Shepherd Drive, which was a south-north artery, and between Alabama Street and Richmond Road, which were east-west arteries. And there they enrolled me in Edgar Allan Poe Elementary School in first grade. After a week, the teacher called me into her desk and asked me to read out loud from a storybook, which I did with some facility, and she said, "You don't belong in this low first grade," and she sent me up the hall to join in with the high second class. This was okay for book learning, which I did very well in, but it put me in poor social adjustment because all these new classmates were much older than I was, and they were all well acquainted with each other, and I was the newcomer. I gained the reputation of a bookworm and teacher's pet. Another problem was related to a popular radio show of the time, which had a comedian, Ed Wynn, the fire chief, EDWYNN, of the Texaco Radio Hour, who gave himself the stage name Ed Wynn the Perfect Fool. This led my classmates to dub me Edwin the Perfect Fool, and I had to stop that. So I dropped my name down to Ed and refused to answer to any name longer. Other than petty problems like this, our new location gave me pleasant relations with other next-door neighbor kids, and a totally safe and peaceful neighborhood with long sidewalks where we could ride our bicycles even into the street and back. Part of my early education about the larger world came during our family's annual summer vacation trips in an automobile to my Uncle James Fitzhugh Lansford's farm in Hill County. The earliest of these yearly events, I remember, was made in a Model T Ford, which had to stop occasionally and repair garages to have its spark coil points filed so they would continue working. These trips to Uncle Fitz's farm were great adventures to me, as in early years I got to ride on a horse, but they forgot to tell me how to make him stop, or climbed the windmill tower, or slid down the side of the haystack and got covered with the dust. It was on one of these trips to my uncle's farm in September 1939 that I first became aware of World War II. My family had with them a portable but bulky and heavy battery radio, and that evening as we lounged on deck chairs in the farmhouse front yard with my uncle and aunt, we heard the radio news report that the German Blitzkrieg had just invaded and moved into Poland, bringing the European nations into war with each other. Now, this reference to a radio might be a convenient point to reflect on our country's state of technology at the time. One of my earlier childhood memories is sitting on my father's lap when I was 3 years old, while he was building a Galena crystal radio receiver. At that time, Triode vacuum tubes radio set were probably available, and later in the 30s, most household radio receivers were bulky, standalone floor cabinets containing heavy and bulky batteries. Several 1.5-volt A batteries for vacuum tube filaments, bulky 90-volt B batteries for plate voltage, and the 4.5 volt C battery for grid bias. Later in the 30s, B battery eliminators or rectifier sections were built into floor model radios, and soon myriads of vacuum tube fancifications came into use, like tetrodes, pentodes, internal twin triodes, beam power amplifiers, rectifiers, octal bases, metal tubes, and so forth. Well, to shorten the account of my pre-World War II schooling, after Pole Elementary, I went through Sidney Lanier Junior High School, grades 6, 7, and 8, and Mirabeau B. Lamar Senior High School, grades 9, 10, and 11. There was no 12th grade offered then.
This is still in Houston, right?
Yes, in Houston, graduating as valedictorian from Lamar High School in June 1940.
Congratulations.
Now, I have mentioned hearing the beginnings of World War II in Poland from a portable radio on my Uncle Fritz's farm. Before that, European troubles that we heard of seemed like distant otherworld events, which we saw mainly on newsreels, which accompanied every movie in those days, in which we heard daily in the 15-minute radio news reports by Lowell Thomas, which my family faithfully and regularly heard every day at 5:45 before family supper at 6:00 p.m. These reports of brown shirts marching in Germany, goose-stepping SS troops movements, German incursions into Rhineland, Austria, and Sudetenland seemed ominous to us, but had no immediate effect on our lives. The Poland invasion was a turning point, but U.S. public life was not directly influenced until Pearl Harbor in 1941. In my Rice freshman and sophomore years, 40-41 and 41-42, I was completely immersed in heavy studying and effort to make top grades as a chemistry major. I had no time for dates, little time for hobbies, except a little photography for the high school annual. I frequently studied until 2 a.m. in the morning before driving to the campus for an 8 o'clock class, and considered any occasional extra hour of sleep a golden luxury. By this time I had many classmate close friends, and we often studied together in groups of 3 or 4. Then Pearl Harbor brought the American public into the war. But my Rice buddies and I were not really affected by World War II still, until we became draft board targets in 1942. We received draft board postcards directing us to, quote, state the occupation for which you are best fitted, blank, unquote. One of my buddies filled in this blank as, quote, pondering the essential verities, unquote, as his best fitted occupation, and sent it to his draft board. He was immediately drafted into the Navy, sent to Japanese language school, and was active as a translator through the rest of the war. Most of us in fall 42 became very upset and uncertain and lagged in our studies while receiving generously given but widely conflicting advice from Rice authorities. Registrar McCann told us, join a dedicated college reserve group and be deferred until graduation, otherwise you will be drafted into the shooting war. But Professor Richter insisted, sit tight and occupy and apply for scientific occupational deferments through the war, unquote. Dean Weiser, on the other hand, told us, I will give you boys all the info I have about draft and deferment, but I cannot decide for you. You must decide yourself which way to turn. To shorten the story again, about 25 of my Rice classmates and I decided to go into the Army Air Force's Meteorology School College Reserve, which we had read about, and according to its literature, it would defer us from the draft through graduation. So we went as a group to the Houston Army Induction Center on December the 2nd, 1942, took an oath of loyalty to the Army Air Forces, and thought we would be left alone in college until June 44. Then we soon learned a major lesson about the federal government. Never trust the promise it makes. In early February 43, we got an Army official order saying that President Roosevelt had just called the college reserves all up to immediate active duty and instructing us to report on 11 February to the Union Railroad Station in Houston to leave for boot camp. Needless to say, this was a major shock to me and my 25 classmates who had been working intensively for years in most of our waking moments to learn what was needed to become professional chemists or chem engineers. As one of my buddies then put it, quote, "All our recent worries about courses and making choices don't matter at all anymore. We no longer have any choices," unquote.
They're going to kind of put you where they want you, right?
Yeah. This group of about 25 classmates and I left together.
If you're going to take a break if you like. I mean,
yeah.
That's fine.
With many other recruits from elsewhere in the state, on the Southern Pacific Rail the night of 11 February 43, heading into the eastern darkness, not knowing where we were going or whether we would ever come back. After several days on the troop train, we arrived in Boca Raton, Florida, a former millionaire's vacation resort that had been taken over by the Army Air Forces for boot camp training of its ground crew sections. We were there for about 6 weeks, and when a measles epidemic broke out in one of the buildings and in one of the other squadrons, our squadron was quarantined by being sent out on bivouac into pup tents, sleeping out on the pine scrub.
Oh, wow.
The pup tents in the February weather were not comfortable, especially after we had just received shots and couldn't move around comfortably, but couldn't stay still and keep warm.
Those aren't comfortable any time of year.
That's right. We had nothing to do all day for about 2 weeks. We were not comfortable, but the Army did send us a truckload of warm food every day. So we thought it over and concluded that the thing the Army seemed to have learned best from experience of 200 years to do efficiently was feed the troops. After much uncertainty, most of my Rice classmates were put in mid-March into another troop train. We had another 5-day trip across America to Los Angeles, where we became enrolled students in UCLA in a sped-up version in a group called Class 6 at UCLA's well-reputed meteorology course had been modified into. The 4-year regular course was accelerated with lectures and labs given all day into 12 months of 1943. While we were fully enrolled students in UCLA, we lived under strict military supervision and leased hotels and fraternity houses, and were marched in formation to and from all classes. We were usually turned loose Saturday afternoons, however, until Sunday bedtime, to freely seek adventures in the Los Angeles area. Many of us utilized those opportunities with enthusiasm, including trips to Hollywood and Vine radio studios, various USO, United Service Organization, setups and many fine arts events. In one USO club, I met a young man who said he was a Disney artist and had drawn some of the animated figures in Fantasia. We were getting aviation cadet salaries of $75 a month, which many of the older cadets went through fast in nightclubs early in the month, used for movies in the middle of the month, and ended the month on Long Beach, 10 cents a ride.
So back to this Disney artist, did you ever find out who that was?
Well, he told me his name at the time.
You don't remember it?
No.
It wasn't Walt Disney or anybody
No. He probably had 100 of those working.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's too bad he didn't give you some of those cells. Those are worth a lot of money now.
Right. During the 11 months before our graduation to second lieutenants in November of 43, we had 2 one-week vacations, leave time it was called, and one after graduation. Those of us who could afford the airfare flew on Braniff Airlines back to Houston to visit family and old friends. The Braniff planes were DC-3s with 21 seats, and we were always subject to bumping off by higher priority passengers. But on these visits home, we learned much more about the shortages and hardships faced by U.S. civilians during World War II. These included severe meat and sugar shortages. I can recall eating 3 beefsteaks during 1943, and all of them were on the airline flights on Braniff that I mentioned. Gasoline and tires were severely short, requiring ration coupons. Gasoline ration coupons became almost a second currency. Flashlight batteries and Hershey bars were extremely scarce in civilian stores, but I had noted in the PX, the Post Exchange in Boca Raton, that both of those were freely on sale in the PX. That's where they were all going. Civilians faced a toilet paper shortage, and beer bottles were so scarce that no full bottle of beer could be bought without turning in an empty bottle on the spot. I solved the beer bottle problem by going outside the officers' club at Bryan Airfield, picking up empty beer bottles off the ground, which had resulted from ample beer sales and flow in the officers' club, and I took them home on visits and made a stockpile to use for home use. Well, at the end of our UCLA course and graduation as second lieutenants, we were mostly sent to weather stations in the U.S. at first. A large fraction of our 250 Class 6 cadet group, however, were shifted out of meteorology into air transport or communications.
So you stayed in the meteorology?
Yes, I did. Of course, the Army found that rather typically it had overestimated the number of weather forecasters needed and trained many more than it needed, so they diverted a lot of them into other ground crew occupations. I stayed in meteorology and was practicing weather forecaster during the rest of World War II. While based at Bryan Airfield, which I was sent to initially, and which was the Central USA training field for instrument flying training for pilots, I was occasionally sent away from there on temporary assignments. One of the most interesting of these was a month at Dugway Proving Grounds, Utah, way out in the Utah desert, west of Salt Lake City. There was a permanent chemical warfare service there, caring for the U.S. large-scale stocks of poison gas agents. The staff also gave short-term courses for Navy, Air Force, or other groups who might need to integrate their own specialties with weather, for example, weather, with chemical warfare technology considerations. I got to see during that time some of the U.S.'s main stock of quote, mustard gas, unquote, which is actually a dense oily liquid, as it was stored in 55-gallon steel drums, laid out about 50 feet apart on the sand in long parallel rows about 100 feet apart over an area of several square miles. We had lots of mustard gas.
Wow. So now, were you in charge of helping dispose of that, or what was the...
No, we were in charge of weather forecasting that chemical warfare service might need in order to ensure that they didn't have it blow back on themselves after they launched it.
Right. Wind patterns and things
right.
like that.
Very, very specialized. Another thing I recall about Dugway Proving Grounds is that the only other beefsteaks I ate during 43, 44 were there, since their commanding officer was buddies with a nearby rancher who had large herds of beef cattle. Ironically, this commanding officer's name was Colonel Bacon, even though he fed us
kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. After more than a year, 1944 and some of 45 at Bryan Airfield, and when after VE Day in Europe, all Army attention was immediately turned toward the Pacific Ocean and the possible invasion of Japan, I was transferred to a large airfield, Seymour Johnson Field in North Carolina, where they were assembling some mobile weather squadrons that would be self-supporting and would have equipment including all needed observation instruments and staff housekeeping gear in trucks to support independent weather station functions anywhere on land. Looking forward to landing in Japan. While this was coming together, President Truman dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and word of the 6-year Manhattan Project for exploitation of nuclear fission suddenly came out into full media exposure for the first time ever. We learned about the Manhattan Project, the $4 billion that went into it.
First time you heard of it when they dropped the bomb already?
Yeah, after they had already...
Yeah, so you remember where you were when you dropped the bomb?
No, I just heard about it on radio broadcasts. I was on Seymour Johnson Field somewhere. That's a big field.
Was that a good feeling? I mean, were you all excited about that, or what were your thoughts?
My thought was that my physics professor forewarned us back in freshman college that atomic energy might someday change the magnitude of the whole energy world in unpredictable ways, and my thought was, now it's finally come. And that was,
he was right.
That was the case. So, shortly after, these bombs were dropped, of course, the Japanese surrender occurred on a U.S. battleship, and we were in VJ Day, victory over Japan. And that evening was a big, big day. I witnessed in the airfields Officers Club, the mother of all wild celebrations of my lifetime.
I bet.
I was in the club with possibly 100 other celebrators and noted beer or liquor in nearly every hand. And all the toilet paper in the building had been tossed over the open ceiling beams and joists and down and up again, and general noise prevailed at an unbelievable level.
I bet.
At one point, the commanding officer of the field came in the front door with his wife. Some second lieutenant with his scissors in his hand rushed up to the general and snipped off his necktie shortly below the knot. The general was good-natured and said, "I can see this is no place for me," and took his wife back home. I don't remember how late I stayed in the officers' club that night.
That's funny.
Now,
he got away with murder, didn't he?
Yeah. With no invasion of Japan impending, all of us weather officers were sent back from North Carolina to about where we were previously. I landed at Hondo Airfield, west of San Antonio, and waited out a long and irritating period to get separated from the military. Nearly all of the 6 million U.S. people in uniform wanted to get out at the same time, and the process fell into national confusion and disarray. Officers needed to accumulate a certain number of, quote, points, unquote, to be separated. And for reasons I don't remember, weather officers accumulated their points relatively slowly. I was sent for 2 or 3 months to another Army airfield base, this time at Clovis, New Mexico, a dismal place where there was seemingly always either a snowstorm or a sandstorm blowing.
I just got back from Clovis. We drove through Clovis a week ago. You're right. That's a pretty desolate place.
Well, it's probably dismally hot now, but it was dismally cold.
It was really hot.
I got that right there.
There's not much to break the wind over there either. It's just wide open country.
That counts for the sandstorms.
You're right.
The base was was close to a large natural gas field, but since a New Mexico senator owned an interest in some eastern coal mine, the air base used only coal for fuel, and there were small mountains of coal piled up just outside the airfield all around it. It was the principal base of all the Army Air Force's B-29 bombers. I still have a small 200-page Army Air Force issued book full of wiring diagrams entitled Simplified Wiring Diagrams of the B-29. Eventually, the joyful news came to me in March 1946 that I was authorized to go to San Antonio Separation Center for reconversion to a civilian. On the way out of that separation center, I had to exit through a large open room which contained near its right-hand wall a desk labeled Re-enlistment Desk. I carefully walked through the room as far over to the left-hand wall as I could get.
Don't want to make that mistake again.
Together with almost all of my previous Rice classmates, I enrolled in Rice again for what was called the Spring 1946, quote, short term, unquote, a one-time only term allowing 2 courses to be taken. Incidentally, all of my Rice buddies came back home in one piece.
Good.
Some other buddies who had not gone to college at Rice didn't make it back. And I repeated for that, in that fall of 46, all of my junior courses taken earlier in 42. Rice charitably dropped the junior semester courses from 42 grades and counted only the repeat grades, which were much better for all of us. Some of us sent transcripts of our previous Rice grades to UCLA, which helpfully combined them with our coursework taken during 1943 and granted us meteorology BA degrees in 1946. So I thereby gained for 36 months in Air Force uniform a spare BA degree from UCLA granted in 46, as well as my originally sought BA in chemistry from Rice granted in 48. Well, this is coming to the end, and as a final irony of my World War II experience, during 38 months in uniform, I never personally saw a single act of violence that was part of World War II warfare. But in 1966, back on the peaceful, enlightened, civilized Texas U in Austin campus, where I was then employed as a research associate, I witnessed Charles Whitman kill over a dozen people from the top of the tower and injure about 24 others.
Wow.
He
So you were down there when that went off?
Yes, I was walking across the ground when he dropped 2 people 20 feet in front of me.
Oh my gosh.
But he wasn't aiming at me, and I instinctively ducked under an oak tree and jumped from one oak tree to another and got into the auditorium building.
Wow. That's terrible. Good gosh.
Well, to sum up this whole survey, it seems to me that the Great Depression of my childhood years and the USA's part in World War II during my adult years both showed the U.S. population in similar states. Nearly all felt they were in the same boat and worked to solve the same problems together. President F.D. Roosevelt, helped lead us through both of these. But since these 2 national experiences, I have never again felt that such a spirit of national unity and collaboration has been achieved.
I would agree with that.
Well,
so that's a great, I don't know, encapsulation of a large portion of your life there, but very interesting story. And so your time in the military was, I'm sorry, you went in 42, did you say?
Well, I went to the boot camp in February 43.
43, okay.
Got out in March 46.
Okay.
Got back into Rice in April 46.
So you got your degree at Rice.
Much late in 48 instead of 44.
And what was your degree in? It wasn't meteorology.
No, it was a Bachelor of Arts in Chemistry.
Okay.
And Rice gave BAs to all academic majors and BSs to all engineers.
Okay.
I had taken the academic, not the chemical engineering course in chemistry at Rice. Actually, I started out for the first 2 years as a chem engineer, and the organic professor talked me and a lot of other kids into switching to straight academic chemistry. I'm not sure that was a good thing, but we did it.
Right.
He had an interesting way of classifying students to decide whether to move them into biological chemistry or physical chemistry. You'd say, which do you find more interesting, mathematics or blood?
It's kind of a weird question, but okay.
Well, it worked.
Well, let's take a break of just a second and give you a chance to
Okay.